Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Sunday, July 7th, and today is day 275. A psalm I wanted us to reflect on today is Psalm 72, verse 14. It says this: God will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight. Psalm 72:14, God will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight. After 275 days, as daily we've been recounting the number of deaths happening in Gaza, in the occupied Palestinian territories, and in Israel, I thought that today, because it's Sabbath, for those of us who are Christian or whatever your faith tradition or not, that we might just consider a brief reflection about the significance of death. In the Abrahamic traditions, in Christianity, in Islam. And in Islam, according to Islamic Relief, they say this: Muslims believe that when a human being dies, their soul returns to the Creator, awaiting the day of judgment. Muslims take solace in knowing that they will be united to the ones that they love, and that death is just the beginning of the journey to their permanent home in the afterlife. Islamic Relief wrote this in their article about death: Our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, experienced countless moments of grief throughout his lifetime, losing those dearest to him in nearly every phase of his life. Allah's prophets all have their own moments of grief documented in their Quran and the Hadith, showing that in his very real human experience, humans are not alone. In Islam, the Hadith is the tradition practiced upon the death of a loved one. When a Muslim dies, they're no longer able to commit good acts of hope that would reward them in the hereafter. A Hadith that brings comfort to many Muslims when a loved one passes to the next world might be the following: when a human dies, their good deeds come to an end except for three: ongoing charity, beneficial knowledge, and a righteous child who would pray for them. This hadith teaches that one can still commit good acts on their behalf for the sake of Allah. It's also a way to show sabr, patience, and love for those who have returned to Allah. When a fellow Muslim passes, those who are left behind are encouraged to say, "Surely to Allah we belong, and to him we will all one day return." These are just some of the statements that are said on behalf of someone who has died, and those are made from the heart when people who are Muslim pass away. And I was thinking about this because we've been talking so much about death and the numbers of those killed in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are Muslim Palestinians. One might ask God for forgiveness for those who've died, for protection from humiliation on the day of judgment, that they might be allowed to heaven, upon their passing. And I have been wondering whether or not, with the thousands killed, whether or not the Hadith has actually been said for them. When we hear about families who've lost dozens of family members, or even bloodlines that have been completely wiped out, who is saying the Hadith on their behalf? This morning, I was prompted to think about this because there was an op-ed in the Washington Post by Anne Lamott. You might be familiar. She is a well-known writer, and she was talking about the joys of growing older and about not fearing death and about what it means to slow down and not be so driven by adrenaline, to not feel so responsible to save the world. And I thought, what a privilege to be able to slow down and to not have to worry about a death that's traumatic or caused by war or bombs or destruction. Lamott wrote this in the Washington Post op-ed. She said, "Older joy is not about chasing down things, as it is about what seizes the eye. Out the window or on a walk, older joy is less caffeinated. When you're younger, joy is photographable for display on a curated Facebook life. Younger joy means endorphins. Older joy feels more like contentment. Someone at my church once said that peace is joy at rest, and joy is peace on its feet." And Anne Lamott went on to talk about dying, and she said, even someone such as me, who since birth has been more anxious than the average bear, can be less alarmist. By this point, we lived through wars and political crises, earthquakes and droughts, sorrow and way too much death. But almost all of the deaths I have seen have been gentle. And one of my pastors said that death is like falling asleep on my living room floor and waking up in your own bed. Those last weeks are often so sweet, if messy, but filled with grace. Anne Lamott said that almost all of the deaths she's seen or been around have been gentle. And I was reading this and it just struck me like a ton of bricks, because that's just not the reality for people living in Gaza or the occupied Palestinian territories. The majority of deaths have been anything but gentle. When I was in seminary, I spent a couple of years serving as a chaplain in a hospital, and I was surrounded by a lot of death. And it was literally my job to usher families through the death of their loved ones. Sometimes death was expected, sometimes not. And regardless of the circumstances, the physiology of death was always harsh when someone took their last breaths and left this earthly life. But when death occurs from war and violence and from circumstances that are man-made, from weapons, from human destruction, there's nothing gentle about that. Violence does trauma and harm not only to the body, but to the soul and the psyche and all of our society. And what grieves me about these last 275 days is not only the physical violence and the certitude of death in each and every one of those statistics, those lives lost. Those are horrors, in and among themselves. Children gone and lost forever. But what kind of earth do we live in? And what kind of humankind allows that kind of death to go on, and that kind of destruction to continue and be perpetrated in our names, and where we even justify it for a political end or for political means? What kind of world do we live in? What does this type of atrocity say about our own humanity, where we allow such a violation of humankind to be perpetuated on our neighbors in this world that's ours? These horrors say more about us than they do about those in the Middle East. Psalm 72:14, he will rescue them from oppression and violence, for precious is their blood in his sight. And my hope and prayer for us this morning is that we will learn to respect and honor the human beings in our midst, Palestinians living in Gaza, each and every one of those lives, Muslim lives, the Jewish lives that were lost on October 7th, all of the internationals who were killed that day, every single human life that has been lost in the last 275 days. And may tomorrow be a day where not another life is lost as a result of this ongoing death and destruction. In the name of Christ, amen.